And Kyrut said, regarding politics and the like, quote, being in power is like playing like life is real. Should we all get sick of me apologizing and giving caveats and saying, well, here comes metaphors, symbols, and it's really got not that much to do with ordinary life, or should we just go ahead and give in and admit the truth? That's all this is about. It's just been a facade, a cover-up. It hasn't, but it's so delicious because the majority of the world, as it should, is intrigued with what appears to be the external side of life, just as they should be. And one of the more, or probably the most intriguing, is in the world of politics in general. Because if you got any kind of good eyesight, religion, when it's really running on 8 cylinders, is politics anyway. That's the only reason. That's why politicians hate religion, tyrants, because they don't understand it, but they know that, hey, close up them churches, because they understand that the church is simply another form of politics. But at any rate, all the way from tyrannical governments to churches with a worldwide, an ecumenical stretch, all the way from that to in here. But as I said, my temptation, just abandon all this stuff about it has to do with your own brain, unless you just turn it into an absolute social, wouldn't be a critique, would it? I still wouldn't admit that. Unusual social observations. The idea of being in power through the real shoddy and shameful means of getting elected. If you ever notice, politicians all over the world, in case you never noticed, if you want to see some more about the human nervous system, it's not about politics, it's the human nervous system. It's closer to the pecking order and herds that you just think it's humans dressed up in Labor Party and Christian Democrats running for office, but if you look at them, they're like moose. They're like wolves, and somebody's had to put a suit on them and a tie, and they're having to ask for your vote. And if you look, it smells funny. And this is nothing new. They don't know how to explain it, but thousands of years ago, the Greeks, for instance, there were people already pointing out that something was real funny about democracies. And after the fact now, historians and social critics, they make a lot more out of it. They have turned it into an absolute political ball game. But I suggest to you that there were people around, whether they understood it or not, even at the time, that they could recognize, they could smell. It is inside the human nervous system a difference between a Caesar who just comes in, well, not a Caesar in Athens, of course, but a kind of tyrannical ruler who just comes in and he's got the power. He's got enough kinfolks, he's got enough soldiers on the tape, and he comes in and takes over. There's a difference between a George Bush and a Joseph Stalin, between a Winston Churchill and a Mussolini. And of course everybody say, yeah. But there's a strong difference, not their politics. There is almost an aroma that doesn't smell right for a man to say, would you let me be in power? Would you in fact help me? Kind citizen, would you come and vote for me? Of course, knowing how things go, I'm sure you agree, or I'm sure I agree with you, you wouldn't want to live anywhere else except where that's going on, as if it made a great deal of difference. But the sense of power is a very basic, it is a non-political, it is a non-psychological aspect of human life. It is the dance of polarized energy, is that somebody's going to be in charge. The Kyrut points out, regarding what appears to be the world out there, whether it be that you're married to somebody, you're in a relationship or in a series of relationships, and it seems like whoever you're with, a man or a woman, that you always are the one dancing backwards. Or that maybe you still feel as though your parents are pushing you around. Or you feel like society is pushing you around. Whatever it is, we're talking about the tyranny that seems to be politics. Or you can believe that morality is pushing you around. You believe that the gods are still hounding you, making you feel guilty. It's all the same thing. It is the sense of being in power. Kyrut simply points out, and this is what makes power in the external world such a, shall we say highly, nothing original, volatile game, is because it is, to quote Kyrut, being in power is like playing like life is real. Because in one sense, although it's strictly metaphorical and relative, those in power, not just those voted in power that could be voted out, but the autocrats, the tyrannical generals that have taken over through force. Part of what makes it so dangerous is, in a real sense, although it's relative, but in a real sense, they are playing like life is real. If this got too strange, which it probably did, let me refer you back to something else we were doing a few weeks ago, Kairuk mentioned, and you guys seem to have gotten something then. The more you're in the secondary world and you have to advertise, or that you are advertising, that you're trying to push your services or your goods, the more it's in the secondary. And of course it had to grow out of the primary, but the more it is in the secondary, the more stringent, the more passionate, and we can use other modifiers if they're going to allow us to manhandle them, the more extreme, even to the point of almost becoming satirical, ridiculous, you must advertise. And all you got to do is turn on your TV, and the more that you look at a product, and if you just thought, well, if I started having to narrow down my life, if the ship was going down, I had to grab what I could take from the secondary world. Of course, you'd first look after the primary, you'd throw water in the lifeboat, and you'd throw some food. But after that, what would be some of the last things that you would ever think about taking? What are some of the things that, although you may have them, and the world says you need them, the secondary world, I don't know what. If I can pick out something that's not important, it'd just be up to you. But, deodorant, a $200,000 car. You understand? But the more, skip that last one because that'll distract you if you're not following, because it can be down to real cheap stuff. But the more it is into the secondary world, the more there has to be a kind of, and you can smell it, a kind of aromatic advertising, a pushing. I would suggest now, if you get good, look at religion. Has a certain aroma. Because in a sense, you're getting into the area. I should think of a product that's really ridiculous, in a sense. What would it be? One of those things that colors the water in your toilet? Well, all right. I guess that made the point. You do understand there are things in the world, that people buy, corporations make profit, stockholders get their dividends off of such as that. But in a sense, if you look at it, you think, well, you're right. If you want to get technical about it, this is probably the last thing in the world a human needs. And if that be so, their advertising has to take on a different flavor. Whereas, as I pointed out before, you don't have to advertise. You don't have to do public service announcements, but you certainly don't have to advertise to try and encourage people to eat food. There's no company out there that's in charge of food, or no PSAs that eat food. You should all eat food, or this country would be a lot better if more of you would eat food. Now, it has to get into, and when it gets into food that has less and less, we're not getting into dietary critiques, but the more it gets into areas that booze, how about that? Candy, stuff that you could really get by without, they have to advertise. Or chewing gum, they have to really push in a certain way, and it smells. If you spot what I mean, I don't mean it stinks, but it has a distinct aroma that they have to become passionate. Then if you get into politics, whether a man's in office or trying to run for office, or whether it is simply the man took power without election, then his advertising, his promos are then known as propaganda, but it's the same thing. Is somebody in a democratic country advertising to run for office, or when they get in keep sending out press releases about all the good work I've done. When it's one guy and he took control, they call it propaganda, which I would suggest to you that advertising firms came up with that. Just they're sticking out their tongue because they can't get his account. They try to go to Stalin and say, could we handle your account? And he thinks, who needs you? I got people working for free. In fact, go like that man up. We'll keep him over here. At any rate, religions and politics, they have to push in a certain way. And it becomes, in one sense, dangerous. volatile that it becomes frightening to a sane person to be around the king out there, the tyrant, the priest, because they are skating right on the edge, although they can appear to be the pillars of that society. The president, the prime minister. I don't mean just these maniacal dictators, as history would have them, but anybody that seems to be running some powerful machinery in life. If you get close enough to them and you got any sanity, you'd prefer probably, if you had your choice, it came to be in a cheap bar down in Bogalusa with drunk bricklayers than you would to be around these high-class people sitting there in the throne room or sitting there with the Pope. And the Kairoot was, being in power is like playing like life is real, because in the sense I'm trying to get you to see, they have to play like the secondary world is more real than anybody. Or else why would a man wasted his life, killed his family, his good friends, clawed his way, either literally or figuratively, into a position of power, whether it be in politics or religion, and then get there and have to face the fact that, Jesus, I was just as happy, it meant just as much when I was a drunken bricklayer in Mississippi, before I was now king or dictator of Romania. They have to play that life is more real than the average person. And they got to play it to the point that it is almost, even those that apparently run for office, and I know that history would say that Nero and Stalin, those people are insane, but I got news for you. The president of a Western country that got, quote, freely elected, he's just as nuts. But they got better PR. And they do, since the king owns, since we're talking about the General Motors firm behind, then he has to watch it because they can throw him out. And he doesn't. In democratic countries right now, they do not have the wherewithal to hold on to power physically. And so they have to, in a sense, act more sane. But once you can smell it, and there's no attack on them, as you know, all you got to do, you can do it second-handedly, third-hand. You can look on TV and see the Pope, see the head of the Orthodox Church, see the president of France or Germany. And they're just as mad as hatters. Except they seem to be better than the dictators, because they seem to have to be, because they seem to have to stand for election. And plus, somebody's told them somewhere along the line, don't get out there and go, leave that to Gaddafi's and the Stalins. And now, beyond all that, would you care to apply it into what seems to rule you ordinarily? Do you not have to play as though it is extremely serious? A man must take himself seriously. And no matter how liberal you might think your politics were, everybody's personality is Papa Joe Stalin. Just some people do not have the nerve to kill off everybody in them. But Stalin supposedly killed his own family. I mean, that's nothing new. But the guys, that's the way the world's supposed to work. Wolves will kill their own family, their own sons. No, I'm in charge. Don't come around here. Go somewhere else. You got to do that. Inside of yourself, you must take it seriously. You have got to play like that this is very serious. And at that level, it is serious. But it is, to quote Kairoot again, being in power, the second line of this particular Kairoot, being in power is like playing like life is real. But the more you are in power, the more you're the one that apparently is the source of direction, the more serious, the more passionate, the more flaky, once you see it, you must pretend that this is real. It is almost the reverse, if you can see how merry-go-rounds work by now. Polarized energy within a limited confine, three-dimensional in this case. That being serious about life is almost the opposite, the far end, from people who are in mental hospitals. People whose, to use ordinary terminology, their personality in some ways disintegrated. They blame it on drugs, or doctors say, well, it was the trauma of his whole family being killed or something. But it's common that they would just, among them, they just crudely describe it like the man's personality just shambles. Just like the stress, the trauma of something in life can apparently just, and people become vegetated. They just sit there and they have to carry them around, and you would think, all right, that is just about the opposite from a dynamic, up and go-getter guy that's president of Italy. If that's dynamic. But a politician, a man who's out there, 60 years old, out there on the hustings, campaigning, flying here and there, making decisions, dressing up, having to go out and drink every night at big dinners. And you think, well, now there is someone right in the midst of life, right down there in the pits, wrestling with a everyday, in fact, more so than the average person, but wrestling with activities and decisions of worldwide significance. Now, that's almost the opposite from a guy sitting over there in a funny farm somewhere out in the Midwest, and he's just sitting there, and they had to pick him up in the morning and sit him over, they sit him out in the sun, ask him what he wants to eat, and he can't even talk, and you just say, well, that's about, as far as an extreme, all right, it's like this. They are, but think about it as a merry-go-round, and you've got like the president of Italy is here on this horse, and right behind him on a swan facing the other direction is this guy that's just flaky as a fruitcake. That's how far removed it is. Well, and of course I'm saying flaky. Well, there's more once you begin to see it, then of course you don't worry about life, because this is not, one more time for you people maybe on TV, this is not a critique of any politician I've mentioned, any of you have thought about. That's simply the way life is. But then once you see that, wait a minute, the people running the world, in a sense, are just one horse away from the guy that should be on a farm. But then you're left with this. Then what's there to worry about? I always thought that these guys were running things. Whoa! They're on the merry-go-round too. If the people that ordinary minds thought are running things, are actually running things, we wouldn't be standing here today. They'd be digging us up in another lifetime. We'd be the ones in the bogs over in Belgium and the Swiss Alps, and they'd be digging us up. You'd be laying there next to the Pope and Joseph Stalin, and they'd go, what happened to those people? And somebody'd say, looks like to me they're serious to death. In a way, there was no great consequence, other than the fact they killed them, but other than that, don't worry about it. Page 4, pressing on. We just talked about that. That's a nice thing of having one person, Kyroot write all these, because somebody kind of ties them up, or else I do it for him. At no salary, I might point out. I know every time I got something to say to him, he's never here. He's always in the bathroom or somewhere. And Kyroot noted, there was a kid who thought, quote, stupidity doesn't sound quite so bad if you call it inhibitions. I don't know that it's necessary that we stay there long on that, but that is, might I point out or suggest, it is still somewhat connected to the one that I brought up twice, that the short version was Kyroot said that a man with a soul has no mind. That's the way it turns out in life, that those who more feel as though, say they do, and believe that they're pursuing something that would be more of a soulful, spiritual nature, then they're the ones who are going to give shorter shrift to the mind. They can't do it completely, but we went through some of that. It is a common, observable, apparent struggle that even ordinary philosophers and social critics have pointed out throughout the ages. This is sort of an expansion of it. Sort of jumping off the merry-go-round for just a second, maybe to grab some cheap cotton candy and then try to get back on. This kid points out that stupidity doesn't sound so bad if you call it inhibitions. And of course, if you go get your thesaurus, I don't think, I know you won't, that inhibitions is not listed even as like the 220th possible synonym for stupidity. They're name connected, right? Wrong. Put it to you crudely. Much of life, in life, that is called immoral is also a nice way of saying stupidity. Now, I know to the ordinary, and people who are religious, it makes no sense, or it'd be blasphemous if they still call it that. But that's exactly what it is, no matter how you cut it. Any religion, any social custom from any culture, that which they call immoral is what? Now, they will go into all kinds of discussions that the guides don't want us to do it, and they will finally get around. If they'll talk just a little bit, they'll start getting around to some of the subdivisions, and they'll even finally, I'm sure, point out, if they're reasonable, intelligent, even if they're religious, that, well, this kind of thing, if it goes on, will destroy or at least put serious strains on our collective community, on our society, that you cannot go around blanking. You cannot go around having unbridled sex between people, destroy the family. You cannot go around borrowing people's property just because it's sitting in the same place for 48 hours and you think, well, it's been abandoned, I'll just, we can't do that. And so they call it morality. But then if you get, it's not a big jump, but if you look just a bit further, everything throughout history anywhere on this planet that is called immoral, if you can look past it, what it is self-destructive. Stupidity. So why would it? And of course, it's not stupidity on the individual level because life still survives and it's right there in the closet and it consumes it. But what they're calling immoral, what they're encouraging, hold back. You should be inhibited. You should not do so and so. It is an excuse. It is a crude version of saying, hey, snap out of it. Wean your brain. He said, man, it sounds much better to say the gods do not approve of this, or to even say, well, even if you're not religious, there's some sort of cosmic moral structure and fabric to the universe. You could even get metaphorical. I'm not going to do it and drag in, if not Newtonian physics, probably quantum physics, and show that, well, what we call morality is simply good sense. There's a certain kind of balance between goodness and non-goodness in the universe, and we should encourage it. We should be kind to the planet and other creatures and one another. That's what he just said. Stupidity doesn't sound so bad if you call it inhibitions. Well, I believe I'll refrain from that. Why, sir? Well, I'm a Presbyterian. Now, it's all right for society, but just because you say that and fill in your own version. Well, because I'm a blank. What you're saying is, I don't know. Your tongue is operating, but there was a chiropractor that points out that the root of man's tongue is connected to a part of the body that has yet to be discovered. That is why, and that's using crude terms like dumb and stupid, which is, just a little joke amongst us to call it something. It is limited thought. It is just opening your mouth and your tongue's connected somewhere and you don't know where it is. You ask somebody, why are you saying that? Because I believe it. You mean you're saying that the reason you live a certain way is because you are a Episcopalian? Well, certainly. And you're serious. Well, yes, I'm serious. Well, why do you say that? And they'll begin to tell you how their tongue, they don't call it that, of course, but how their beliefs are connected to the grand history of the Church of England. How there were people who had the foresight to break away from the restrictions of Rome. Why it is that his family has been in the avant-garde of the liberalization of the Church of England, if it could get any more liberal. It is all saying everything but what this is saying. It is saying everything but what the other chiropractor is saying is, a man with a soul normally has no mind. Or he's going to feel as though he has a soul, and it's going to be a matter of increasing and decreasing portions, that the more he feels as though he has a soul, should have a soul, that's the more importance that he places upon it, the less he will on his mind. And if you say, well, don't you see that that is at the very least non-productive, or could be more productive under today's conditions? And they'll say, well, no, I don't. That's because their tongue, their mind is still connected to a place they can identify, and they will say, well, it's identified to my own intelligence. That's right, my parents were from the Church of England. I'll admit that. But I am not a faithful member of that church now. I'm not an American Episcopalian simply because of that. No. I went to school. I studied comparative religion. I read on my own. And I came to the firm conclusion on my own, that this is where I belong. He does not know to what his tongue's root is connected. Well, it's no big secret. It's connected to your genes. No, it's connected to my mind. Not as long as you're talking about soul, it's not. Not as long as you're talking about, well, I think what I am because of, and then you point to an external source. Well, I believe so and so. Well, I got no complaint with that, but why do you believe that? Why do you say that's true? Because it says so right here in the Book of Common Prayer. It says so right here in the Old Testament. It says so right here in the collected poetic works of Joseph Stalin, of which I try to pattern in my life. Call it inhibitions. Call it guilt. Call it sin. As despicable and shameful as that seems to sound to some people still, it sure sounds a hell of a lot better than saying stupid. Well, the forces of evil and darkness have clouded my judgment. Yes, sometimes I go out and I drink too much and I'll push my wife around. It's Satan. Or if you're Episcopalian, I guess. It's that unholy call of the papal state. Come home, come home. It's the work of the devil. That sounds a lot better than saying I'm stupid. Just for any of you who think that religion still serves no great purpose. It serves a wonderful purpose. If it wasn't for that, what would you... You'd have to admit you were stupid. Or else you'd say, wait a minute, I'm between decisions. How do you explain your life? You'd go, wait a minute, I got one, but wait a minute, I'm in a hurry. And you'd have to keep stalling off. Morality, everything that seems to have to do with one's behavior on a moral basis will always cloud, will always stall off, and not just your lifetime, it's stalled off now for 3,000 or 4,000 years. Of having to say, well, you ask me why I did that, I'll admit, stupidity. Which, one more time, is not the correct term. It's because if you understood that, you wouldn't admit it anyway. You wouldn't be wasting your time answering attacks or even inquiries from somebody else. Because if you understood anything, you don't do goddamn interviews anyway with anybody. But if somebody brought it up, which of course you should have brought it up to yourself, or else you should be a reporter and really be in the dark. But if you did something and you thought, why did I do that? And you know, well, I didn't do it because my mama beat me, or I didn't do it because my daddy didn't beat me, or I didn't do it because I'm an Episcopalian. You realize I did it on the basis that that's the way life works. But that sure is unprofitable to me. Stupidity, that's her maiden name. But it sure sounds a lot better to say, well, either religion or psychological trauma is all the same thing. To think somewhere else. To let your tongue beat out the rhythm. Except it's hinged to a place that... See, most people think their tongue and their belief is hinged to their spirit, to their soul. And Kyrut said, everything that is now serious in the secondary world was once a hobby. That'll kind of take the starch out of your choir robe. But if you... if you can get a glimpse of it, all you got to do is back up the kinds of descriptions we have used, the operational description of the primary world and the gradual working in the secondary, and that the secondary world is like an invented animal, except you can't invent it, that it's all some kind of outgrowth. You know, even the colored water in your toilet. You do know it's sexual. You can always say it's back to the primary world. That, well, you know, people think better of me, especially the girls I try to bring up the house. If I have green water in my toilet and it doesn't, you know, the whole bathroom doesn't smell so bad, or God knows what, you got to fill it in. But no matter what it is in the secondary world, if you go back, there was a place. That's what I was trying to get you to see. If you go back far enough, it's not a hobby. This is wrong. If you go back far enough, we're back to the three basic, absolute, de rigueur minimum requirements to stay alive. The primary world. But there is a little spot that doesn't exist, but there's a little spot that where everything was a hobby. And that was like right when sex started to become love. Let's make it crude. When lust started to become romance. There was just one little second. And of course, in your lifetime, it could take hours. It could take 60 or 70 years in your lifetime. In the lifetime of some group of people, it could take 6,000 years. But there was one spot that didn't exist. That was almost like that one moment that went from being primary, which is so serious that you can't even call it serious. It was the original poster boy and model for seriousness. You know, what's more serious than staying alive? That's the only thing that's serious, is the primary world, in that sense. And so you get into secondary, and the more you move down that way, the secondary, it becomes less and less serious, such as colored water in your toilet bowl. But it's like at one time, there's one little spot that doesn't exist where it was all a hobby. It was like this one time that it went from being deadly serious into the secondary, and it's like life itself went... Of course, I could make an instant chi root and say that could be another description of the revolution as you're trying to get to the spot where life does that. And life, you start seeing useful info as another chi root tonight. And a rebel's mind doesn't see info as either from the front or the back. All it is a profile. That if it's coming or going, it's garbage. But see, that's what ordinary people would do. Well, wait a minute. This could be either serious or not serious. Or this is either true or not true. That will not give you the profile. Because then you think, well, it's either coming or going. It's either this or that. And it's garbage. But there was almost one time that didn't exist where everything was a hobby. A split second. Just to call it something. What if you could see that? That all the seriousness, yeah, I understand why it's serious with everybody else. But there for a split second, before it got to be serious business, that you have got to find yourself a good barber and get an up-to-date haircut. You've got to get a good wardrobe. That's serious. It's not. But there's one spot somewhere that you went from being naked, and just crude, just serious, without knowing serious, and suddenly the mind, the great gods and everybody went, let there be intelligence. And for that split second, everything was a hobby. If it moved, like everything had to get up. Like a big old tired, happy, fat hippo just having a cigarette, just got through, having a little hanky-panky fun, and suddenly the cosmos says, it's time to get serious. That is, you got to know you're serious. It's like a lumbering hippo. Civilization itself, all of humanity, kind of rises itself, understands, all right, here it goes. Now I've got to become humans. Now I've got to become a thinking creature. But it's like a split second, like the hippo's getting up, and he knows he's never going to be able to sit down again. Well, those of you with a past background, I guess more attuned to the Judaic Christian, it's like Adam. The story, that God said, wait a minute, you get out of here. And it's like that split second. They realize, I'm going from, I had it made, that now, the gods made me talk. Jehovah says, hey, you can talk. What the hell you been doing? I told you not to do that, or whatever the story was. And he said, get the hell out of here. And it's like for a split second, he realized, well, it's never going to be the same. It's going to be, in a sense, downhill. I won't ever be able to sit down and rest again. But for a split second, it's like he looked at God, and they looked at each other, and they both realized it was gone. Of course, ordinary people, they keep thinking, well, I wish I could go back. That would be the retrieval of Eden. Nah. And we've been through that. That'd be death. You can't do it anyway. What they're really after is what I'm describing, is to get back to just that one little, that razor sharp edge that doesn't really exist, to where they all realize, uh-oh, in a sense the jig's up, or in a sense the jig just started. But the point is, forget Thomas Wolfe or who the hell it was, you ain't going back home. You can dream and talk all you want to, you're not going back home, you're going somewhere else, and you don't even know where it is. And so for a split second, everybody understood, well, hey, it's just a hobby. And speaking of that, brings us to page 18. And Karuk said, a neighbor from another nearby universe visited Earth and made a studied survey of man's so-called mystical and spiritual quests. And after making this study, he offers this uncommon observation. Whenever a human discovers what he calls the truth, it's always in the form of a complaint. Even when not obviously so at first hearing, behind each of the higher revelations lurks a lamentation. This is right in the heart of what we're talking about with only 3 or 4 minutes left. Take any, I don't try to rub one in your face, I just have to pull one out. In the Western world, they keep like to throw around, God is love. That seems to be the truth. But whatever the truth, pick out anything that's a proverb, even if you thought it had some greater significance, pick out something from a religion, anything that seems to be, throughout history, religious or just philosophical, that men had such an impact that they remembered their words, and they said, I have discovered the truth. Here it is. And they say it. It is always a complaint. Even if at first blush, I picked out one, I'm going to let you wrestle. You could say, well, all right, if you took this kind of shortcut Western Christian idea, God is love. You could say, where's the complaint? It's always a complaint. Any time that the human mind believes, the ordinary mind believes it has discovered the truth or a new truth, a continuing, the truth is always on the basis of a complaint, even if you can't see it at first. How can that be? I'll be glad to tell you. They're complaining that what we thought before now wasn't true. And they're kind of pissed about it. Of course, they're religious. They won't say pissed. I guess they'll say peeved, or I was in the dark. My soul was clouded before I saw the light. It's a complaint. It's a complaint against your foes. It's a complaint against stupidity. It's a complaint against the inertia of darkness and the powers that clouded our souls and drug our minds and our spirits down. But now we have the truth. Well, what else could it be? How could it be an apparent step upwards? Why would people struggle to go off on these great quests? Why would people study, torture their brains because they think something is wrong now, as they should? And so all the truth that the ordinary mind comes up with is always a damn complaint. And nobody can recognize it. That's why even Kyrut let slip through several modifiers. That is, the guy offered this uncommon observation. That's pretty fancy for Kyrut. Not just this observation, but everything that the human mind ordinarily conceives of as being some kind of new truth, a truth, the ultimate truth, the building up to the ultimate truth, is always a complaint. And I didn't mean to sound that much like a preacher, but we're running out of time, and a little passion right at the end always helps. And be sure and send in your money. But it's to consider that every time, and now you can get past religion and mystical quest, when you think that you have discovered something new, a new truth. Well, I've always been attracted, or when I always end up with women who